drunk father nearly killed me and my family. What to do when your own father turns into a monster? This is the question I ask myself every time I think about that night that changed everything. It was December 23rd, 2012. Christmas was already in the air, but instead of a festive mood, there was tension in our home that you could cut with a knife. I was only 15 years old at the time. We lived in a small town called Clarksville, Tennessee, where everyone knew each other. My father, Thomas, had always been known for his friendliness and willingness to help. But over the years, he changed beyond recognition. The reason for these changes was alcohol, which became his constant companion. It started with Friday nights out with friends at the bar, but quickly turned into daily binges that began before noon. We all noticed these changes. My mother, Sarah, tried to talk to him, begged him to stop, but Thomas pushed her away, claiming he controlled the situation. I also tried to reach out to him, but at 15, it's hard to get through to an adult man who refuses to acknowledge his problems. That night, I was in my room, trying to escape reality through music in my headphones, when I suddenly heard something crash downstairs. My heart started pounding faster. I knew it wasn't just a coincidence. When I went downstairs, I saw my father swaying in the kitchen, holding an empty whiskey bottle in his hand, with shards of broken dishes scattered on the floor. His gaze was vacant and cold, and his face was twisted with anger. He was mumbling something, but the words didn't form coherent sentences. That was the first, but far from the last, encounter with his dark side. I stood there, paralyzed with fear, not knowing what to do. My only thought was, if I don't calm him down now, something terrible might happen. But then I was just a boy trying to understand why the world around him was falling apart. It was the beginning of the end for our family, but I didn't realize it at the time. Moreover, I didn't know that this was just the beginning of the struggle that lay ahead of me. That night, something inside me broke, and from then on, I was never the same boy again. Dark Mind 22. This sounds awful. I can't imagine what it's like to see your father like that. It takes a lot of strength not to lose control in such a situation. Just another victim. Reading your story, I remembered my own father. He was also an alcoholic. It's so hard to live in constant fear. I sympathize with you, Break. Macycle, your words resonate so much. It's important to share these stories so others know they're not alone in their experiences. Hang in there, Silver Lining. 34. My father also drank, and it ruined my childhood. But the worst part is the feeling of helplessness when you see everything falling apart and you can't do anything about it. Hopeful tomorrow. Thank you for sharing this story. You're not alone, and your strength lies in the fact that you were able to endure it and find the courage to tell others. After my father smashed the bottle and had a breakdown in our kitchen, I realized this was not just one of those nights when he got drunk and went to bed. This was something else, much worse. It wasn't just about drinking. It was his complete loss of control, and my mother and I understood that in the same moment. It happened on Saturday, December 23rd, 2012, around 10 p.m. Father, Thomas, was completely drunk, but this time he became aggressive. His eyes were burning like a predator's, and in his hands, besides the empty bottle, appeared a kitchen knife. I saw him holding the knife, and it clenched my chest. Time seemed to slow down as I realized what was happening. Mom, Sarah, immediately noticed this and rushed to him, trying to wrest the knife from his hands. She pleaded with him to stop, telling him that we loved him and that he needed to go to bed. But Thomas was no longer the man she knew. He had become a monster she could not recognize. He shoved her with such force that she fell to the floor, hitting her head against the kitchen counter. I saw blood streaming from her forehead and realized the situation was spiraling out of control. My younger sister, Emily, who was only 8 years old at the time, was hiding behind the sofa in the living room. Her small body was trembling, and I saw tears streaming down her cheeks. She was paralyzed with fear, and it broke my heart. I knew I had to act, but I was overwhelmed with panic. How could I protect her from our own father? But I had no other choice. I lunged at him, trying to divert his attention from Mom. I grabbed his hand, attempting to wrest the knife away, but he was stronger than I imagined. Father pushed me away, but I didn't give up. I stood in front of him, protecting Emily, ready for whatever might come next. I saw him swing at me, and at the last moment, I jumped aside. It was a miracle he didn't hurt me. Mom was already getting up from the floor, holding her head. She tried to intervene again, but I knew it would only make him angrier. My mind began to work faster, and I tried to find a way out of this situation. At that moment, it felt like we were stuck in some horrific reality from which there was no escape. But I knew I had to act before it was too late. Sarah tried to reason with Thomas, but he didn't respond to her words. He was like a fog, focused only on his rage. I heard Emily sobbing behind me, and it gave me strength. I couldn't let her get hurt. I couldn't let our father be the cause of our demise. In the final moment, I remembered the phone in my pocket. I quickly dialed 911, hiding behind the sofa, trying to do it discreetly. My hand trembled as I told the operator that our father had become uncontrollable and was threatening us with a knife. The operator said that the police were already on their way, but the only thought spinning in my head was whether they would arrive in time. Reddit, no escape. 96. My heart is pounding with tension. I can't imagine how you endured that moment. It's truly horrifying. Survivor_bro. Man, you're a real hero. I've been through a similar situation myself, and I know how hard it is to feel helpless in front of someone who should be protecting you. Lost and found moments. The worst part is seeing someone you love turn into a danger. I sympathize with your sister and Mom. I hope everything will be okay with you. Nightmare fuel. Your story reads like a horror movie, but the scariest part is that this is reality for many. Hang in there, friend. We are here for you. I hope the police managed to rescue you. Your life could have ended that dreadful night, but you found the strength to act. I remember every detail of that terrible night. It was December 23rd, 2012, around 10:30 p.m. Our house on Pine Street, 57, seemed to be completely immersed in darkness and chaos. Father, Thomas, was so drunk that he could barely stand, but that didn't stop him from grabbing a kitchen knife. The blade glinted under the dim light of the flickering kitchen bulb, making the scene even more horrifying. Sarah, my mother, was on her knees, holding her head, where a deep wound had formed from hitting the counter. Her eyes were wide with terror, but she continued to beg Father to stop. Sister Emily was hiding behind the sofa, trembling and quietly sobbing, trying not to draw attention to herself. I stood between Father and the rest of my family, feeling my heart pound in my chest as if it was about to burst. Father raised the knife above his head, and I realized there was no time for hesitation. I knew he was out of his mind and could do anything. The only option left for me was to distract him, buy some time, hoping that help was close. I stepped forward and shouted, "Dad, look at me. It's me, Jason. Do you really want to do this?" My voice was filled with panic, but I tried to stay composed. He turned his head towards me, and for a moment, something like confusion flashed in his eyes. But it lasted only a moment. He raised the knife again and took a step towards me. In that terrifying second, I realized that we could all die. But just as his hand began to move downward, the kitchen door burst open with a bang. Mr. Gray, our neighbor from across the street, rushed into the house. He was a man in his 50s, burly and strong, but also very kind. As it turned out later, he had heard the screams and without hesitation came to our aid. Mr. Gray managed to grab Thomas's hand at the moment when the knife was already pointed at me. The blade grazed my shoulder, leaving a shallow cut, but I didn't care. The important thing was that we were still alive. Gray wrenched the knife from my father's hands and threw it on the floor. Thomas struggled, trying to break free, but he was too drunk to put up a real fight. After a few minutes, which felt like an eternity, the police arrived. They apprehended my father while we all sat on the floor embracing each other, trying to come to terms with what had just happened. Mr. Gray stayed with us, waiting for the ambulance to arrive to check on Mom and me. He said he had heard our screams and simply couldn't stay away. That night, he saved our lives, and I will always be grateful to him. Without him, I shudder to think of what might have happened. Thomas was taken to the local police station. At that moment, my life changed forever. I could no longer look at my father the way I used to. He was no longer the person I knew. And even when he was sent for treatment, the wound he left in our family would never fully heal. Saved by the neighbor. Mr. Gray is a true hero. It's rare to find neighbors willing to step into a dangerous situation. I'm glad he was there. Shadow of the past. I got tears in my eyes reading about your sister hiding behind the sofa. No one deserves that. Stay strong, my friend. Life on the edge. This situation could have ended in tragedy, but you were brave and did everything possible to protect your family. I'm proud of you. Never give up. 84. Your neighbor deserves a medal for bravery, but you didn't back down either. You could say that you saved each other. Looking for hope. I hope that after this incident, you were able to find peace and safety. I'm writing this comment with tears in my eyes. I can't imagine living in constant fear for your life. After that terrible night on December 23rd, 2012, our lives were never the same. We sought help, and Thomas was sent for mandatory alcohol treatment. This decision was difficult for us, especially for Mom, who couldn't forgive herself for not noticing the signs earlier. But there was no other option. It was only through this that he could begin to recover from his demons. Thomas was placed in a specialized rehabilitation center in Nashville, about 60 miles from our home in Clarksville. He spent 3 months there while we tried to recover from what had happened. I remember one day in early January as I was walking home from school, I stopped by our house, not wanting to go inside. The house felt empty, even when we were all at home. I no longer felt that it was our sanctuary where we could hide from problems. Emily, after that night, couldn't sleep alone for a long time. Every night, after Mom put her to bed, she would quietly come to my room, cuddle up to me, and cry. She was afraid that if she was left alone, it would all happen again. She was only 8 years old then, and these fears left a deep mark on her. Mom also struggled to come to terms. She often sat at the kitchen table, drowning her sorrow in cups of coffee, staring blankly at the wall. She said she felt guilty for not stopping Dad sooner. She blamed herself, even though we all knew it wasn't her fault. My life also changed. I was no longer the carefree teenager who could live his life without worrying about the future. That night, I realized that growing up comes not with age, but with experience. I felt older than my years, as if every wrinkle on my father's face had left its mark on me as well. When Dad finally came home in April 2013, we all feared that nothing would change. But he was different. I saw it right away. He apologized to us, but words were not enough to erase what had happened. It was the beginning of a long healing process, and even now, years later, the wound has not fully healed. We all still carry these scars on our hearts. This incident changed my perception of life and family. I understood that family is not just the people you live with. It's those you are willing to give everything for, even your own life. I realized that what matters most is not the perfect picture from the outside, but how we support each other in the darkest moments. I'm writing this not to seek sympathy or support. I want to tell everyone going through something similar. Don't be afraid to ask for help. We often think we can handle things on our own, but that's not true. There are things we cannot overcome without support. I urge you to share your stories, even if they seem too painful. Only in this way can we help each other see that even in the darkest times, there is always hope. Hope restored. Your words are inspiring. I've been through something similar, and I know how important it is to have someone by your side. Thank you for sharing. Finding peace. 42. I'm impressed by your strength and maturity. Not everyone could endure such a blow and still find the strength to help others. Family first always. I'm so sorry you went through this, but I'm glad you didn't give up. Family is the most precious thing we have. Broken to healed. Your words helped me realize that I too need help. I've been struggling with a similar situation for years and now know that I'm not alone. New beginnings. Because of your story, I decided to see a therapist. I never thought I'd need it, but your experience showed me that everyone needs help,